episode 31.
Top of the day to you.
From across the pond.
Episode 31, baby. All the horrible things. And a very, very, very horrible thing happened this previous week. I mean,
yes.
This is something I'm never going to get. Where were you when you found out the Queen died?
Well, I'll tell you. I was at home. It was my birthday, and it was ruined.
No!
I will forever be the guy who had a birthday that the Queen died on. Yep.
That's pretty momentous. Yeah. I mean, the girlfriend told me, and I was like, yeah, we all saw that coming, right? I mean,
this was not a shock. She was 90-something.
96 dies of natural causes. At least that's what we're told. I mean, it could have been something much more seedy. Maybe she had the monkeypox or something.
Right.
And they're not going to tell us that, right?
They will never ruin her legacy with that.
Well, did you have a personal connection with the Queen? Did she
none
break through to you in any way? No,
none whatsoever.
No, Are you a Crown guy? Do you watch The Crown?
I watched first couple seasons, and I'm like, yeah, I don't really care for this.
Yeah, I tried to get through the first season. I could see why people say it's good TV, but I don't. Horror, sci-fi, fantasy, I like drama, but I don't necessarily like the worshiping of people that are just handed things in life,
Absolutely.
That's my biggest issue with it. That being said, all respect to those who do like the pomp and circumstance. I'll tell you what's a horror show, though. It's been a week of them dragging her carcass across the United Kingdom. What's that about?
Yesterday, I was just looking because it's all that American news coverage is covering, but there's a 2-mile long line of people waiting just to,
These people not have jobs? What's going on?
You know what? I bet you could call into work and say, still suffering from the Queen's death.
Well, in case it's not clear to our beloved audience, we're doing UK horror because
we're doing the UK horror
in honor of the Queen. This is our way of respecting the Crown, even though as a Irish American, they did horrible, horrible, horrible things to my people in the past. So it was a little satirical, a little ironical from my perspective. But nonetheless, my sister's moving to London in a week. So there's that. And I don't want to get her in trouble peripherally,
No.
So yes, all hail the Queen. And in her honor, we're doing some UK horror. We got 4 titles for you. Mm-hmm. The first 2 are in honor of her corgis. Her 40-some head over her lifetime, ridiculous.
Right.
This is Cruella de Vil sort of levels of dog ownership, if you ask me.
Right.
A lot of fur. Do we see the Queen and?
You can almost picture her in it, but that could just be, another Mandela effect of
Good point.
You're royal, you wear fur, I guess. No, that's a really good point, and it's a really good connection because both of these movies deal with werewolves.
Yes, Dog Soldiers and Howl are the first 2 we're going to talk about. And I got to give it to England. They own werewolves. I feel like the lore of werewolf goes back to Werewolf in London, probably pre that too. Mm-hmm. I actually wish I'd kind of done a little more research into the origin of the werewolf story because
I love werewolves and I would love to dedicate a full episode to it. So we can really
there's plenty of them out there. That's a good point. Yeah, we'll do some more lore in that, but this is just in honor of the Queen's corgis. We're going to start with Dog Soldiers, which is one I hadn't seen prior to this. It's a 2002 film directed by Neil Marshall, who actually is a pretty decent director. He did The Descent.
Neil Marshall. He did The Descent.
He's done some episodes of series that I really, really love, including Westworld, and what else does he do?
He's done
Hannibal, Constantine, Game of Thrones too.
Yes. Yeah, like the large battle. Like he has done some big battle scenes for Game of Thrones, which makes a lot of sense. He has made some pretty fun war films.
Yes, and this one does. It's rooted in a combat battalion, I guess. What would you call it? Special forces unit.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's sent into the Highlands. So really, this does take place in Scotland, I guess.
Well, UK,
but you got a lot of
UK.
English actors in. Is Neil Marshall himself English?
Yes, he is.
Yes. Okay. So yeah, he's from Newcastle. One of my favorite beers, by the way. I love a good.
Great beer.
good
Great
brown-
beer. Underrated.
brown beer.
Yeah.
But it actually has some really decent actors in it. Granted, did it feel like it was a 2002 movie for you? Maybe I think 2002 is closer to us than it is, but it felt more like a 90s flick to me, mid 90s based on the production value. How did you feel about it?
Yeah, I completely agree. I was kind of confused whether it was video or film at times. I mean, I know it wasn't like high level production, but it did kind of look like, 90s. I guess, that transition from 90s to early 2000s film does kind of feel the same. This movie,
fair.
though, was his first feature. He really had to, I think he started writing this in the 90s, so maybe that's why it feels like that. I think he started this writing process for this movie in 95 and kind of had some indie feel like producers on it too. Like it felt very low production, but totally works because the werewolves are fantastic looking.
The werewolves are cool. They're honestly, the legs of them are so freaking cool. They look like, your stereotypical tall, big alien with the big eyes. The bottom half of it looks like an alien werewolf to me in a weird way. The way that they're so tall, strangely skinny at the bottom, but just so ferocious at the top. In terms of the design of the werewolf, I'm on board for that entirely. They're freaky looking.
And it may have been most of the budget, I mean, there are shots where there's multiple werewolves, so they're not just reusing one suit. They knocked it out of the park with their practical effects.
I agree. In terms of the plot, I thought the opening scene where essentially we're introduced to Kevin McKidd, who I really enjoy from Rome. If you remember, he's Lucius from Rome. I think that's really his claim to fame more than anything.
I believe
when he's kind of like he's trying to join the special forces that's led by this character, Captain Ryan, Liam Cunningham, who's Davos from Game of Thrones.
Love him.
And he refuses to just like upright murder a dog. Kind of sets our theme for killing
Save
canine.
the cat. It's our save the cat moment.
Yes, that's a good point. But essentially, we're on his side. Then we're on Cooper's side because he's kind of the good guy. And then it's established later that Captain Ryan he's setting up this group of special forces who are on a training mission to essentially be bait because they're trying to catch one of these werewolves. What do you think about this storyline?
It's pretty simple. I think the storyline isn't going to like win any original plot ideas, but I think as a device it worked. I think
I agree. I think now it would be maybe an American Horror Stories episode. I don't think
Sure.
you could sell this as a feature anymore based on what is actually in the film. I felt like there's a lot of fluff in there, sort of thing.
Yeah.
And a lot of just expendable, army men. And another big issue I had with it is so geared toward guys. I don't see any, stereotypical mainstream female audience member wanting to see this at all, and I'll admit I wasn't excited to watch it at all.
Really?
Yeah, no. I mean, I'm not big on army movies to begin with,
Sure.
so it immediately sets it up with the title Dog Soldiers. I was a little more relieved when I saw the actors in it, and I was excited it was in the Highland. I haven't seen stuff take place in the woods, but then it really does condense down to this cabin that they're kind of like sheltering in. For the majority of the movie takes place in the cabin, wouldn't you say?
Yes, it has very Sam Raimi Evil Dead feelings with the editing style and inside the cabin. But funny that you should mention one of the productions. One of the hardest things for this movie to actually get going was the location. They originally wanted to film it in the Isle of Man. And then it got bumped from there. They were going to try to shoot it in Canada. And I think they ended up actually shooting it in Germany, but, with some Highland B-roll to, round it out to make it feel. But the location, I think, was great. It's got that countryside UK cabin feel. And It works. It works in the, the confinement.
I agree for the most part. Again, I just felt like it dragged a little bit for me, and I felt like it did struggle at times with the tone. One particular moment that I want to mention is their battalion leader, I guess you call him the caporal of their crew, is Wells, who's played by Sean Pertwee, who people might know as Alfred from Gotham.
Yeah.
Interestingly, he pops up in Howl too.
Yeah, he does.
But there's strangely, like, he gets pretty much disemboweled very early in the film, and they're able to drag his ass to the cabin.
He's holding his guts.
He's holding his tubes, just his guts just hanging out. But then when he's back at the cabin, there's this mutt there, this dog, who he smells the blood and is literally grabs one of his intestinal tubes and is just like yanking at it, and he's like pulling his own intestines, like it's a tug of war with his intestines with the dog. It just kind of like threw me out. I don't know if it was supposed to be funny or gross, or it just felt really bizarre to me. And granted, because he was attacked by a werewolf, we do find that he is able to he is healing. So I guess there is some legitimacy to it overall, but it just blew my mind how this guy is the wherewithal to be awake, lucid, conscious while the dog is ripping out his intestines and he's yanking them back. And I don't know, that scene just threw me off. It was fun, but at the same time, it kept me from having any scare in this, There was no actual fear for me in this film. And as much as I loved the design of the werewolves, it was so odd and not necessarily in a scary way for me. I don't know. How did you feel?
Sure. I mean, this isn't, this I think could be classified as more of like an action horror, because it's dealing with a lot of the, the soldier aspect of it and less of like the lore of the werewolves, which would have been cooler if you remember, like the actual opening scene was that couple in the tent, and they established the sterling. I mean that. Oh yes, she bought him as a gift this beautiful silver sterling letter opener. Yeah, and it's not even clear if he knows what it is at first. No, it's just shiny, so he's appreciative. Very strange opening, because obviously they're going to use this silver letter opener at the end to kill, the lead Ryan, Liam Cunningham's character, who has been turned himself, even though he was trying to capture one. He becomes one, and it's a big showdown between him and Cooper, Kevin McKidd's Cooper, where of course that letter opener comes back to save the day, jams it in him before blowing his head off too. There were some fun fight moments. There's a character, I think his name was Spoon, where they have a big old throwdown in the kitchen, him and the werewolves, and he's like, I hope I give you the shits, because he knows he's gonna get eaten. And the gore in it is pretty fun. The way these bodies just get totally mauled, and it's almost like overdone, where it's not, I don't think the human body would become as mushy and bubbly and everything that we're seeing in this, but at the same time, it was good fun. It was good fun, and I think it was a great first film for Neil Marshall. And I think, as a first film, I mean, it was well done as far as storytelling, and I mean the whole save the dog moment comes back really well when the dog ends up basically helping. I thought, it was a really great first film for a director.
Interestingly, though, both this and Howl, the lore of the werewolves is not your stereotypical lore. Granted, the bites, the slashes will turn you into a werewolf slowly, but they don't turn back. Once you're a werewolf, you're like a werewolf always, right? Was it established that they turned back, or?
If we're talking about both of these movies, I don't believe so. I think that's a really good point.
But it's a little confusing, because there was the woman in the cabin that was helping Megan, and she was also a werewolf, but then turned into it. I was a little unclear what was going on with Megan, our one female character in the whole movie, because when they go to this cabin, it turns out that the people that live in this cabin are the werewolves. It's their cabin.
Yes.
So they're taking refuge in a space that is well known by these werewolves. Do we get to sunlight in Dog Soldiers? We
do,
but everyone's dead at that point.
Correct. The house has been blown up, and somehow our main character has survived because he was in the basement.
All right, so it's a little unclear whether or not they turn back, but I don't know. I guess they could have clarified that a little bit more. What's interesting, though, you want to jump to Howl, or is there anything else you want to say about
let's jump to Howl. Let's do it.
In Howl, the werewolves also look cool. This is from the creature designer of The Descent, which is another interesting overlap.
That's fun.
The guy who designed the werewolves in Howl, which is a 2015 movie.
Correct.
Yeah, which also has a really fun cast, if you ask me. Let's mention right off the top the driver of this train that's going across the country. What's interesting, another like closed location. This is a train that's going across England, and our main character is Joe, who's the train conductor, not the conductor. He's the guy who takes your ticket.
The guard. He is your guard.
Your guard, that's what he's called. Yes, absolutely. So we have the guard. There's an interesting little small part at the beginning from Brett Goldstein, who people will know from Ted Lasso. And he's a dick. You get to see him play like much more of a dick than he is in Ted Lasso, certainly. And he's about to be Hercules, too, for those Marvel fans out there. But anyways, the premise is train going out before the last stop. It runs into this big deer, and it happens to get stopped in werewolf territory,
which I almost wanted to know if the werewolves did that on purpose. You know, like did they leave? Are they smart enough to have derailed the train to create a buffet, if you will?
That's a good question. I don't know because sometimes they seem like they were intelligent, and at other times they seem really animalistic and not at all. One interesting thing about these werewolves, though, is they can climb trees. One of the coolest scenes is these werewolves like in the treetops, something I'd never seen before.
In the tree? Yeah,
because dogs are not known to climb trees, so I found that a little weird. But you know what they really reminded me of, the design of these, is like the old school werewolf of old from like the 30s. You know, our first werewolf, especially in the shadows where you see the yellow eyes and
the eyes are so cool.
And the hair billowing. That was cool. I feel like these might not have had as unique a design as Dog Soldiers, but I found them much more intimidating and scary. I definitely found this a more fear-inducing movie, I guess, than Dog Soldiers.
I would agree with that. Yeah. I mean, I think something really well done by the director was you don't see the werewolf until maybe the end of the second act or even the top of the third, because I was afraid that, and this was my second time watching it. And the first time I watched it was so long ago that I didn't realize who Brett Goldstein even was. But I was afraid that, the director just did so great of a job hiding the werewolves, like the design. You only see like a foot or a claw coming through there, that they were avoiding showing you the full thing. And then when you actually see the full werewolf later in the movie, it's like, this is something to be proud of. Like these are really
well designed and freaky looking. Like the first one you see that's attacking them within the train that essentially killed the big fat shawarma eating guy in the bathroom. Little throwaway character, but you know, I thought this guy was big enough to feed the werewolf. He'd be satiated. He'd be done.
And they would just be like,
he could be done with the rest of them. But no, this werewolf was wearing a ring. It seemed like it could have been a female werewolf. Very strange, very human hair too coming down from it. Versus like your fuzzy, it had like a mane, like a long hair situation that was really unique. But the teeth were badass, and it was unique looking. You know, it definitely gave me a little bit of a shiver. It did.
You know, now that you're pointing that out, I am a little curious, because we'd see fully transformed werewolves, and then we also see versions that are humanoid. And even the old woman who gets attacked, she's like, that was not an animal, that was you know.
Yes.
So I'm wondering if maybe they weren't fully turned, or they were more of a hybrid. Interesting.
That would make sense. Yeah, I could see that being the case. So obviously you got them trying to escape. And what's funny is this movie has your stereotypical archetypal cast, right?
Mm-hmm.
You have the asshole guy who's cheating on his wife. You got the pretty boy, but he's kind of the only one that wasn't archetypal, and that the pretty boy turned out also to be an engineer and really saved the day in the end, when you kind of expect him to be throwaway too. And then you got your person of color who gets killed so quick, but he was my favorite character. He was the funny dude.
He was the funny, quote unquote, nerd type who ends up being a badass with an axe.
Yes, that is very true. He was very frightened at first, but then
they
raises to the occasion, gives the engineer pretty boy enough time to kind of like fix the train.
Yep.
And then of course you got your main character Joe, who's fallen in love with the tea trolley girl. Yeah. And then you have this other female character who's kind of like the jaded woman, I guess you could say. She's been wronged by the brute asshole character in the past during a job interview. I think she got short shrift, man. I honestly think she should have not been treated the way she was in the film. I completely
agree.
First of all, she's forced to pay double the price of the tickets, that 40 pounds at the top, after she had her
for a short ride too.
Yes, for such a short ride. And then she gets kicked out the door by the guy who was misogynist toward her, thrown to the wolves, literally.
Well done.
Which was a shame, because she was one of the more dynamic characters, I feel like, of these archetypals. And then, of course, you have your old couple, and that's our first turn, is the old lady's the first one bit, and then they're dealing with her turning and whether or not to kill her, and the old man won't let her die, to the point of course, she ends up chomping into his neck.
Now, the thing I really liked about this old man character, that he ends up being the take charge guy. Like, let's make it difficult for these werewolves to actually eat us, and let's defend ourselves. And then he's also the same character who provides the backstory, the lore of the previous train in the 60s, 1967 or whatever it was. The same thing happened, which makes me wonder too, if they could have elaborated, like explained the lore more. And is it like every 30 years that these werewolves show back up, or they just,
that's a good point.
But I liked that they tried to, give the backstory without making it so much of a heavy handed, like the guy's like, you're all too young to remember this.
I completely agree. Let's talk about the end of Howl. So ultimately everybody's dying. The only people left is Joe and our trolley lady. What is this actress's name? I guess Rose Day plays Nina, the trolley girl. And then, of course, our big jerk face of a character who's been abusive to all the other characters during it. Joe and Nina are running away, running into the woods. It seems like they're going to make it. And there's no werewolf in sight. And Joe just slows down. He's like, no, we're not going to make this. We can't survive. And they're talking there for like 3 minutes about how they're not going to make it when there's nowhere around. He's like, you got to go. You got to just run on your own. I'm going to face down these werewolves myself. And this is where the sun comes up, and the werewolves are not changing back. And then there's really kind of like romantic sort of choreography going on. And when they finally bite into Joe, he essentially gives up, which is so ridiculous because he's such a badass during the majority of the movie. And then suddenly he's just like, all right, I might as well just become one. But they do turn him instead of eating him.
Right.
Which then gives us the payoff of Joe, the werewolf, now getting to take down, what's this jerk face's actor's name? Oh, yeah, he's Adrian, played by Elliot Cohen. And he gets to go and eat the jerk. And of course, Nina does survive. We get a fun scene of her back at the train station. She has his name tag with her. I really felt like the end was rushed as a whole, wasn't thought out compared to the rest of the movie. That's the only thing that I really felt like was the downfall, where I would normally say, okay, this is a must-see for werewolf fans, for horror fans as a whole. I just feel like it did fall apart a little bit at the end and felt like they had to finish it.
Yeah, you definitely wanted more. I mean, I think that's the only positive of them rushing that there, is that it felt like this should have been a sequel. There should have been a sequel to this.
Yeah, they did rob that opportunity for a sequel. But at the same time, there's awesome gore. Even just the carcass of the deer underneath the train was really impactful. And then, of course, the driver, the way you see his body splayed out. I liked it. And of course, the annoying girl, one archetype we didn't mention is this really annoying girl who plays her music out loud on the train. She gets it good.
On the quiet car. On the quiet car.
Exactly. She definitely had it coming. Well, one thing I wanted to ask you about is because I have been to England, and the train that I was on was kind of more like our metro here in Chicago, where the seats are faced forward or backwards. This was more like a train, a long distance train that had seats like an L, like an L train, a subway train, just on the sides where people look at each other. I found that odd. It certainly makes for more room for filming. You know what I mean? It made it easier for them to actually have interactions and block things way more interestingly. But yeah. I don't recall ever seeing a train like that. So
I think you just nailed it. I think they probably built this set practically and reused it for different scenes. And yeah, it made sense.
But I dug it. Who directed this? That's one thing I haven't looked into. Has he done anything else? Paul Hewitt. And he is known for, what else has he done? Oh, I guess he's a big makeup guy. So maybe he's only directed 4 things. Oh, interesting. Peripheral. Oh, that's not the Peripheral that's coming out on Amazon, which I am excited about. But The Convent, Howl, and The Seasoning House. So he's not known for much, but I thought this was pretty darn good for a werewolf flick.
100% agree. I thought it was.
And this was in honor of the Corgis again. We discussed dogs, but we're going to move on to more proper English fare now. That isn't werewolf based, unless there's more you want to speak about Howl.
No, just check it out if you haven't seen it. It's still fun, a fun ride.
Yeah, it's solid. It's solid. I'll give it that. Solid B of a flick. Let's move on to last year's Last Night at Soho. I remember seeing the preview for Last Night at Soho when I saw Censor, which is another English horror film that I liked a lot. I really liked it a lot. And this is Edgar Wright, 2021 release. It has some of the top actors and actresses around right now. You got Anna Taylor-Joy, who's like that hot it girl. This Thomason girl I don't know as well. Thomasin McKenzie, I remember her from Old. If you remember M. Shimmelight's Old. And then, of course, Matt Smith, who is all the rave now because he's the bad guy in the new Game of Thrones. You liked it. I want to know why.
Well, I thought this was a really fun setting. And I love Edgar Wright. I love his films. I love his directing style. This seemed like the first time he's moved away from his like fast-paced editing like he normally does. You could look at Shaun of the Dead and another film just right in like the heart of London. Completely different from that. I'm not usually one who likes movies that take place in the 60s, but I think I was able to get myself immersed in this a little bit more because it felt more like a mystery.
True, in the 60s doesn't necessarily take place in the 60s, right? It's more of this, I don't know what would you even call it, vision of the past through essentially dreams. She doesn't want to sleep. It happens in her dreams, but she is seeing sort of what happens, but there is some inconsistencies of what she sees and what actually happened. But go ahead. I'm sorry.
No. I like the character. I loved the main character. I loved her backstory. I love that she's living with her grandma and like she's obsessed with the 60s. I really thought they had a really well written characters. Although I do think the ending was wrapped up a little bit too obviously. What is her name?
I would agree with you there. You could kind of see the twist coming. Oh yeah, and she was this older lady. I can't remember her character's name in Game of Thrones too, who turns out to be the woman that she's shacking up with because she can't live in the dorms because the character or her roommate in the dorm is such a jerk. So she has to move out, and then she's living with this old lady Elaine again, which is similar to the scenario she had in the country with her gran, because her mom had killed herself. We don't really know what's up with the dad, do we? She died when she was really young, if right?
Yeah,
The dad.
I think they ask about the dad. The mean girl asks about the dad, and I think she
Right.
says something along the lines of, "I don't know him."
I will give you that. I think the characters, especially her character, is well written. I had a hard time buying into this hallucinatory, the visions that she was seeing. I know that was the whole premise of the film. Her, but I really struggled, and interestingly, both this one and Men, I really are critical of misogyny. You know, it's really coming down hard on how men treat women. We do have one nice male character in it who ends up her boyfriend in the end, who's this guy who kind of sees that she's struggling at this new fashion school that she's made it into. And she's great at fashion too, but I just felt like there was a lot of the same. She kept seeing the same things. She kept freaking out in front of everybody in the same way. I felt like it was a little draggy in that sense. Visually, I loved it. I love the visuals. And you're absolutely right in terms of the characters. Well done. But there's something that just, I wanted it to be over when I was watching it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It was one of these films like, I need you to wrap up quick. And I'm not a huge Matt Smith fan. I mean, I'm looking, I don't know him from anything other than this and the new Game of Thrones. I'm hoping to get to know him more. I didn't watch him as the Doctor Who, but he's not my favorite. Let's put it that way. But I do love to hate him. So I guess in a sense that works for this role, especially because he ends up Anna Taylor-Joy's pimp. And yeah, I don't know. We probably shouldn't give away the end on this one because it's so new and people will be watching it. But it has a decent twist. I could see how you say you saw it coming. I guess it's one of those ones where I was a little annoyed because they established something is happening and then it just didn't happen. It hadn't happened that way. And that was like act 3 of it was her trying to understand how it happened one way when it just didn't. And it is just kind of like the rug is pulled out from under your last 40 minutes of viewing. And I don't like it when that happens.
All right.
But I get what you're saying in terms of the direction, the visuals, the characters. Definitely worth a look if you're an Edgar Wright fan. I would say in terms of horror fans, I'm not sure I would steer horror fans toward this one.
No, I think the really only horror element of this is the visions she starts to have of like these ghosts around her almost all the time. Yeah, I mean, here, I'll say this. This movie has been out streaming on HBO for some time now, and I've had a lot of opportunities to watch it. There was something, and I don't know what it was, that was keeping me from watching it. I'm glad I did, but yeah, maybe it's not for everybody.
Yeah, I'm completely with you. It was one of these ones where, like, when I saw the preview, I was excited to see it. I think it just boiled down to some of the reviews that I read not being very favorable of it, and perhaps those just bled into my subconscious. And if it wasn't for this podcast, it might have been another year before I actually did watch it. So
Same.
I think it's technically good, but it's no Men. Let's talk about our final film, which I absolutely love. Saw it in the theater. I saw it in the theater in June. I found it really impacting, honestly. And the second time that I watched it last night, I got so much more from it, to be honest.
I bet.
So tell me, this is your first reaction. You watched it a couple days ago, I'm assuming.
Yeah.
What's your take?
Well, it's interesting because I loved this movie. I didn't really do any research before I watched it. I just heard so many mixed reviews, and I'm a little annoyed by a lot of those mixed reviews now. I especially from horror fans who just like, I think we're maybe expecting it to be something else. It was 100% an A24 film.
Yes.
It feels very much like a lot of their other movies, but I loved the characters. I loved the bit of the mystery too between our main character and her ex. I really, really enjoyed that. I thought it deals so well with misogyny and Rory, forget his last name, the actor.
Rory Kinnear, freaking
so good.
Amazing. He's becoming one of my favorites. First time I saw him was Kill List. I think we talked about Kill List.
We did.
But if you liked him in this, he's freaking amazing in Kill List. He has the ability more than I think any actor since maybe Daniel Day-Lewis to lose himself in characters where I barely recognize him as some of these characters because he plays all the guys with the exception of her ex in this movie.
And I think the first time I saw him was in Black Mirror, like the original, like
first.
I think he's in the pilot of the
yes.
And he was just so
the
good.
Prime Minister who has to wank a pig.
Yes. I thought this movie was really, really well done. And the director, is it Alex Garland?
Alex Garland, Ex Machina and Annihilation is what he's known for.
I thought this was so different from his other movies. And I really love how he can do that. How he was able to, especially as a man directing this movie, to really hone in on these different types of terrible characteristics of even, it's nothing new, but modern man, and the different characters and the different like archetypes that Rory is able to play between the priest, the little boy, the host, the Airbnb host,
Jeffrey. Oh, what's interesting is that's all he's known as in the entire like the casting of it, the crediting is just Jeffrey.
Just Jeffrey.
Because Jeffrey is all of it.
Man, I mean, we can jump into meanings and what you believe.
Yeah, well, let's establish it for those who haven't seen it. Ultimately, we have our main character, Harper, whose husband has died. It's ambiguous whether or not he has killed himself or he has slipped, but ultimately she wanted a divorce and he wasn't having any of it. He couldn't accept it. And like he gets to the point where he actually hits her and she's like, all right, I'm done with you. I don't care if you kill yourself. So he tries to like go into the apartment above to get down to her apartment to continue their conversation that she's not allowing. He's not accepting her stance, I guess. And it's unclear whether or not he's jumped or whether or not he slipped doing this.
Right.
What's your take based on what we see? Do you think he killed himself or do you think it was an accident?
I think he did. I think he did it because I think he played this person in her life who was kind of holding her hostage in this abusive relationship, whether it was mostly psychological and verbal until we finally see a physical altercation. Right. I think he was committed to
just hurting her that way.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. I think I love that it's a mystery, to be honest with you. The only thing that I'm going to say suggests that he slipped and didn't actually jump himself was his face when he's falling. It looks like an uh-oh face versus a take this, take that face. That's the only thing I'm going to, and I personally, maybe he jumped and made it seem like he slipped because that's a way to hurt her anymore. It is really about making women suffer, this movie, men's, in a way, like jealousy that women are the ones that are capable of bringing life into the world, and we are kind of subordinate to them in that sense, to the point we then have to domineer over them. I feel like what is going on with the gender stuff is what this movie's all about. It's obviously called Men for that reason. But you're right in terms of let's break down the different archetypes that Kinnear plays, because there's starkly different ones. Certainly at the beginning, we have her trying to get away, staying in this English home, and she's like a child again. It's like she's been reborn. She's enjoying nature, the serene surroundings of the countryside. She's walking just like a babe, seeing rain for the first time again, seeing the beauty of the trees for the first time. And then she gets to to the tunnel, which is essentially what people are probably most familiar with from the trailer, which it should be representative of, okay, she's getting through something. She's getting through to the other side. And as she starts to encroach upon it and kind of play with it, she's playing with the echo of it. And the echo of things is really what is at the heart of this movie too. And how men's pain and torment continues on from generation to generation. And that's what perpetuates man subordinating women, essentially. Because when she does this, there's such a creepy little echo that she does. I wish I could mimic it right now, but I'm not going to try. Eventually, this guy at the end of the tunnel is a long ass tunnel too, which is what's so cool about it. this guy at the end gets up and just starts running at her with his like
So
horrific
creepy.
scream. We find out that this is what was known as the Green Man later.
Yep,
So it's a
yep.
completely naked guy who ends up following her back to the house, just completely stark nude, and he doesn't seem to have normal intelligence. He doesn't speak, but he's very ominous, super creepy, and he does in a way try to get in to the house. He's especially through the mailbox slot, which I feel like is very metaphoric of it's vaginal stuff. A lot of vaginal, a lot of phallic stuff going on in this whole movie. But this first guy who's naked is, I guess some people are arguing, he is where man and nature kind of meet. It's like how man has spawned from nature, hence the Green Man title. And to me, I look at all these different archetypes as like sexual maturity almost. So this is just like raw sexual nature. I don't know if you remember when he comes out at the end, he's the first incarnation. But when he approaches her, she's in a position that is very suggestive. And it's just like sex drive. It's just nature, recreation, or not reproduction, sort of.
Right.
Mindless. Because he's the one that he also has this amazing scene where he blows this pollen into her face. Yeah. And she inhales one of them. So it's kind of like forcing more. He's forcing the reproduction. It's like he's kind of the rapey character in a way, metaphorically, if you were to ask me. What did you take from this? Green Man.
I mean, yes, I completely agree with everything you just said, but there's also elements of him that made me think that he's also representation of Adam and walking through the garden, literally plucking apples, forbidden fruit, until he notices the woman, and what he's been programmed to do is just reproduce, and he wants to force himself like an animal upon her and get into her home, get inside of her.
That's a good point. There's definitely a lot going on with the Adam and Eve analogy, especially because she starts it off when she shows up at this home eating an apple off this apple tree. And it's an original sin thing. Woman having done that has forced humanity to suffer, and man, simply because of his physical power, I guess, especially over in this scenario, has the ability to then make woman suffer more. You've made me suffer and have to reproduce and not live in Eden, and now I'm going to make you pay for that for eternity. That's what
and Jeffrey's character even like notices when she's eating the apple. He's like, oh, you shouldn't do
scrumping.
that.
Were you scrumping?
Yeah, forbidden fruit.
I love that word.
Forbidden
scrumping. Let's look at it. Let's go through the archetypes in the way in which at the end they birth each other, which we start with our Green Man, and then the Green Man turns into our little boy. He's not a little boy. He's he's a prepubescent character, but he's got the face of Rory Kinnear as a man. But he's clearly is really creepy. This is the only part where the CGI is not the best, I guess. But at the same time, it adds to the eerie nature of it.
Yeah, it's effective.
If the first one is just raw, natural, unthinking sexuality, then we have our kind of impotent. No, not impotent. It's immature, stifled sexuality, where he still has these desires for our character Harper, still expects her to tend to his needs, to want to play hide and seek, to do what he wants, but he doesn't have that physical capacity to be a sexual being yet.
Right.
What did you take from him? Like, if we have our raw sexuality here, this is the immature seedling of sexuality.
Correct. He I think kind of embodies it the most when she stumbles upon him outside of the church wearing the mask and wanting to play a game, and because she says no, he like curses her, and it's exactly that. He's a immature, he's entitled too. He's
resentful too. I feel like that he can't. He can't domineer over her in the way the other males can, but he still has power over her.
Correct. He is, beyond immature. It's like There's no repercussions. He's like no one there to tell him no. Yeah, terrible.
And interestingly, he's wearing this mask of a I would argue like an idyllic looking woman, you know, the blonde hair.
Yeah.
And then he uses it on the dead bird later. To me, it's like, at that age, putting women on this unrealistic pedestal and expecting them to essentially exist for you, sort of thing.
Yep.
So he's born from our Green Man. And then he starts to explode at the end and birth our Reverend character.
Oh man,
has some of the most powerful scenes in it. Very creepy. To me, this is one looked the least like Rory Kinnear because he has these like black eyes. And but if we go from raw sexuality to immature sexuality, now we have repressed sexuality.
Repressed.
Which you know, really the church in this stands for any sort of religion, I would feel like, that kind of subjugates women to you know, ideological norms according to whatever doctrine they're following. He then becomes the most salacious with her toward the end and is the only one that actually like almost gets on her, sort of thing. And then she does the reverse penetration by shivving him in the kidney, it looked like. But yeah, I feel like when you repress the sexuality, then you're like taking power over women, preventing them from being able to have kids and pretending like you have that power when it's really their power, sort of thing, to reproduce by taking it away. Like it's this ironic sort of power grab that in itself is unnatural. I think he's really being critical of religion here and suggesting, especially those that abstain from sexuality, as being super hypocritical. And in a way that's super misogynist, even though you're not being with women, your denial of them is in itself something that's domineering.
And in addition to that, he blames her. It's your fault that I'm feeling this way. The repression it's because it's not his fault. It's how
he asks her what made you drive him to kill himself, right? He puts all the blame on her, absolutely. And I think he does that the most out of any character because of the original sin thing and him just seeing women as why humanity suffers.
Yeah, and the way he talks about women, you know, of course there are times that men are going to hit you, and well, did you allow him to apologize?
Right.
And she's like, what? It's terrible, and it's terrible in that first scene where they're on that bench together, and he's got his hand on her leg. Your first thought is like, oh, he's trying to console her, but it's beyond inappropriate.
Right.
And when she leaves, there's that amazingly creepy shot of his finger and hand on the bench, and it's
just very subtly kind of like stroking it. There's this little perversion in the hand that you see.
Yes.
If you notice, his one finger had a really long nail to his pointer finger, had a really, really long nail, which then we see later in other characters of his that have the full-on horror nails. Yeah, to me, he was probably the scariest of the bunch. So we move from raw to immature to repressed, and then he gives birth to Jeffrey. I think he probably should have given birth to the policeman because we don't see the policeman birth, but that's another archetype of essentially letting man get away with what would you call that? Transgressions against women, right? Because ultimately he does arrest the naked dude, the Green Man, but then releases immediately. Like essentially, you harassing a woman, stalking her, whatever, that's not really a crime because it's not that big a deal.
It's representative of what if a woman was abused today and the police, you know, it's he said, she said, like, well, yeah.
That one was kind of skipped. He wasn't birthed like the rest of them, but that probably would have been too much. It was already maybe too much with all the birthing at the end. But instead, we have the repressed sexuality leading to Jeffrey being born, who is the man who's let the actual country home to her. And he seems sort of sweet at the beginning, but at the same time, there's this undertone of awkwardness. To me, he's like an incel. He's impotent sexuality. He's someone who wants women but can't get them, sort of thing. Especially this is obvious. I feel like when she's getting away in the car, she hits him. He gets up and rips her out of the car suddenly. He's been so normal and nice up till that point, and then he grabs her by the hair, pulls her out, but then drives away himself because he can't deal with her in the same way the other Jeffreys, the other men have, and then like regrets it, and he has to come back and he tries to just destroy her. Very incel sort of character to me.
I also looked at his character as being a representation of the chivalrous man. He, when she first shows up, he's like, "Let me get your bags, allow me."
Right.
But he also, it goes too far. Like when he shows up later and there's an intruder, he walks around the house. He's there to protect her, right? He's the White Knight, and he has to kill that bird and crack its neck, and he doesn't want her to look at it. It's
and even at the bar, he buys her a drink. She's like, "No, I can buy my own drink."
Won't let her pay for a drink. So yeah, he's a representation of this, the good guy. But the good guy can only do so much before he also breaks.
The passive aggressive, sort of like his powers exists through seemingly good deeds for women. I love that, the chivalrous point.
Yeah.
There is certainly misogynist tendencies behind chivalry. And then finally, the final birth is our boy James, her deceased ex, who at this point, I read one article about this, about how she's so badgered by all these men that she's become numb to it. It's like their pain, because every one of them, as they're reborn, has the same afflictions that they've accumulated over the course of the movie, between the split arm, which is the most graphic scene in it, when the character sticks his arm through the mailbox and then she stabs it like down by the elbow, and then he pulls it out, essentially splitting his arm in two. Every incarnation then from then on of all the men have this split. When Jeffrey gets hit by the car, then he's got a broken leg. And both of these wounds appear on every other man, and they're also connected to how her ex had died. He fell into this fence where his arm kind of got split in two a little bit, and he broke his right leg, I want to say. So the same sort of injuries that occurred to her ex's body has now manifested in all these men, and then he's the final one birthed. And what did you think of the end? I think most of the people's criticism didn't get what was going on underneath the surface, but also were just dissatisfied with how it ended. What was your take on that?
I just don't think people put it together that all of these men were her ex, and this is how she was dealing with it. And I mean, I think ultimately we learn that she is able to move on, and the way she's fighting off each one of these memories or repressions. And I think, when her friend, spoiler alert, when her friend shows up at the end in her car and she sees the bloody scenes, and she sees that she's okay, she's there. And I think it's, a sign that she is going to be okay. She's going to be able to move on. But yeah, I don't know if enough people really thought about what was going on with the different births and iterations of her ex.
That's interesting, because at the very end, you're absolutely right. The friend shows up and she's pregnant, which is interesting in itself, because you don't know that when she's talking to her on the phone the whole time. But the end of the movie, I guess you could say, is when the title card Men pops up, and we don't get the interaction between the friends until after that title card. So really, in Men's mind, like, men say when it ends, right? When he says, when she's like, "What do you want from me?" And he's like, "Love." And she's nothing to say, and then okay, that's it. But no, we get this additional, women have women, you know what I mean? Women have each other in friendship to help them deal with us. I mean, it's interesting, because I think gender roles, men aren't as stereotypically horrible as they're depicted in this, I guess. But it does suggest then at the end, the only saving grace is that women have women. Women have each other.
and you mentioned that she was her friend is pregnant, and I kind of took that as we don't ever learn of her friend's situation. Does she have a man? And what I was getting at the very end that we learn is that women have women, but they also don't necessarily need us, because I took this too far, but I was thinking that maybe her friend got impregnated without a man. Maybe
That's very possible.
Showing that, there are ways to go about a relationship and starting a family now without having to be in a relationship with, someone that you marry or traditionally, and that maybe she was.
I love that. I love that take. Ultimately, this is a way of the sins of the father onto the son sort of thing, as you see through the wounds manifesting over and over again, all the way back to the beginning of man sort of thing, that might be escapable by like IVF or whatever the heck. You don't necessarily need to have the father figure who's in this shown to be a corruptive force, right? Men as corrupting other men through all time. But there's the possibility that women can avoid this by getting rid of us. But needless to say, we loved it. We ended up talking half of the cast just about men, rightly so. But it's very thoughtful. Talk about elevated horror, right? This takes it to the next level. I think if you got a weak stomach, you're not going to like the end. There's some very, very, very graphic stuff going on there. But I loved it. I thought it was top notch. And I love Jessie Buckley. We hadn't even mentioned what an amazing actress she is. I remember her from Chernobyl. She's in a season of Fargo with Jason Schwartzman one. Love everything she does.
So good.
She's an Irish actress, and the rest of them I think were pretty English up in here. Her friend I think is maybe Scottish. She's from Glow. If you remember that.
Yeah, I do.
Well, yeah. Anything else you want to talk about Mian?
I don't think so. I think people maybe shouldn't be turned off necessarily by the reviews and should actually watch it. I think it's like a necessary viewing.
100%. Especially if most people really like Ex Machina. That has really kind of resounded with people. So give it a shot. Look below the surface if you do. But, in the meantime, people, stay alive.